It was supposed to be a fresh start, an escape from the chaos of city life into a peaceful, picture-perfect suburban neighborhood. For Michael Carter, a hard-working professional in his mid-40s, this home was more than just a house. It was the reward of years of dedication. Nestled in a quiet cul-de-sac, the property had everything he had ever dreamed of. A spacious backyard, a charming front porch, and friendly neighbors who waved every morning as they watered their lawns. It was the kind of place where people took pride in their homes, and life moved at a gentle, predictable pace. But there was one thing Michael hadn't fully accounted for: the Homeowners Association, HOA. At first, it seemed like a harmless organization meant to keep the community in order. The rules were strict, but nothing out of the ordinary. Lawn maintenance, house colors, and parking regulations. It all seemed reasonable until he met Karen. Karen Prescott was the self-proclaimed ruler of the neighborhood, a woman in her late 50s with an iron grip on the HOA board. With her perfectly pressed suits and an ever-present clipboard, she carried herself with an authority that went beyond her title. Karen didn't just enforce the rules, she made them up as she went along. To her, the HOA wasn't about maintaining order. It was about power. And nothing gave her more satisfaction than bending homeowners to her will. Michael first encountered Karen when he moved in. She had greeted him with an unnervingly tight smile, her eyes scanning him like a detective, assessing a suspect. "Welcome to the neighborhood, Mr. Carter. I trust you'll follow our rules to the letter," she had said, her tone more of a warning than a greeting. At the time, he had shrugged it off as nothing more than an overzealous HOA president doing her job. But he had no idea that Karen had already marked him as her next target. The first few months were peaceful. Michael adjusted to his new life, enjoying quiet evenings on his porch, sipping coffee as the sun set behind the manicured lawns. But the tranquility didn't last long. Strange things began happening. A notice appeared in his mailbox one morning. A fine for an unauthorized flower bed. Confused, Michael checked the HOA handbook but found no such rule. He dismissed it as a simple mistake and paid the small fee. But then came another notice, and another, each more ridiculous than the last. A $100 fine for leaving his garbage bins out an hour past collection time, a $250 violation for excessive yard decorations, which was nothing more than a single garden gnome. And then the biggest shock, a legal notice stating he was in violation of HOA property guidelines, with a warning that his house could be repossessed. That's when Michael realized this wasn't just about fines. This was about control. Karen wasn't just enforcing rules. She was targeting him. But why? And more importantly, how far was she willing to go? As Michael crumpled the latest notice in his hand, his jaw clenched. He had worked too hard to let someone like Karen steal what was rightfully his. He didn't know it yet, but the battle for his home had just begun. Hey, real quick, if you're enjoying the video so far, make sure to hit that like button, share it with friends, and subscribe for more awesome content. And while you're at it, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. All right, let's keep going. Michael had barely settled into his new routine when the first notice arrived. It was a crisp, white envelope, neatly tucked inside his mailbox, bearing the unmistakable HOA emblem in bold red letters. At first, he thought nothing of it. Probably just a standard welcome letter or a reminder about neighborhood guidelines, but as he unfolded the paper, his brow furrowed. Violation notice. Unauthorized modifications to landscaping. Fine, $250. Failure to comply will result in further penalties. Michael reread the notice, confusion settling in. Unauthorized modifications? The only thing he had done to his yard was plant a few hydrangeas near his front porch. A simple addition to brighten up the space. He flipped through the HOA handbook he had received upon moving in. Nowhere did it say that adding flowers was against the rules. Brushing it off as a clerical error, Michael decided to address it in person. The next day, he walked over to the HOA office, a small brick building at the entrance of the neighborhood. Inside, behind an impeccably polished wooden desk, sat Karen Prescott. She barely looked up as he entered, her manicured nails tapping against her clipboard. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice dripping with impatience. Michael held up the notice. "There seems to be a mistake. I got fined for planting flowers. But I don't see any rule against that in the handbook. Karen finally looked up, her lips curling into a tight, smug smile. Oh, Mr. Carter, welcome to the neighborhood. We take our guidelines very seriously here. Right, but there's no actual rule against flowers, Karen sighed dramatically, as if explaining something painfully obvious. While it's true that there isn't a written rule about planting flowers, there is a guideline about maintaining the visual harmony of the neighborhood. Your hydrangeas, while lovely, disrupt that balance. That's why we had to issue the fine. Michael's jaw clenched. That doesn't make any sense. Half the houses here have flower beds. Karen's expression hardened. They were approved. A beat of silence hung between them. The implication was clear. Michael hadn't sought approval. He exhaled sharply, forcing himself to stay calm. All right. How do I get approval? Karen's smile returned, but it didn't reach her eyes. Oh, unfortunately, the approval process is only open during the annual landscaping review. That's 6 months from now. In the meantime, I suggest you remove the flowers and pay the fine. Michael stared at her, a cold realization settling in. This wasn't about rules. This was about control. For the sake of keeping the peace, he let it go. For now. He paid the fine, removed the flowers, and went on with his life, hoping it was just a one-time misunderstanding. But it wasn't. A week later, another notice arrived. Trash violation, improper placement of garbage bins. Fine, $100. Michael frowned. His bins had been placed exactly where the HOA guide specified, on the curb, not blocking the sidewalk. Still, he shrugged it off and paid the fine, thinking maybe he had misread the guidelines. But then, more notices followed. Excessive yard decorations. Fine, $250. It was just a single garden gnome. Failure to maintain driveway cleanliness. Fine, $200. He had hosed it down the day before. Noise violation. Fine, $300. He had hosted a quiet dinner with 2 friends. At first he tried reasoning with Karen. Each time she had the same patronizing tone, the same smug look, the same rules are rules, excuse. But the worst came one morning when Michael stepped outside to find a bright orange warning notice plastered on his front door. Final notice. Repeated HOA violations. Failure to comply may result in legal action, including property seizure. Michael's blood ran cold. Legal action? Property seizure? This wasn't just about silly fines anymore. His peaceful dream home was turning into a battleground. And Karen? She was making it abundantly clear. She wasn't going to stop. For the first time since moving in, Michael felt real unease settle in his gut. But even then, he tried to shake it off. This was just a misunderstanding, right? He still believed that logic and fairness would prevail. What he didn't know was that Karen had already set her sights on him, and she wasn't about to lose. Michael had lived in the neighborhood long enough to know something wasn't right. The notices, the fines, the threats. It was all too calculated, too personal. Karen wasn't just enforcing rules. She was targeting him. But why? The answer came unexpectedly one evening when Mrs. Henderson, his elderly neighbor from 2 doors down, approached him as he was retrieving his mail. She was a sweet woman, the kind who always had a tray of cookies ready for anyone who stopped by. But tonight, her expression was grave. Michael, can we talk? She asked in a hushed voice, glancing around nervously as if someone was watching. Michael nodded and invited her onto his porch. As they sat down, she let out a heavy sigh. You need to be careful. Karen, she's done this before. Michael frowned. What do you mean? Mrs. Henderson's voice dropped lower. You're not the first one she's gone after. She has a pattern. Every year or so, she finds a homeowner, usually someone new, someone who doesn't know how things work, and she makes their life miserable. She buries them in fines, claims they're violating HOA rules, and when they can't keep up, she finds a way to take their home. A chill ran down Michael's spine. What? That's insane. She can't just take someone's house. Mrs. Henderson gave him a sad, knowing look. She doesn't do it alone. The HOA board is in her pocket. They raise the fines, stack up legal fees, and before you know it, the homeowner is drowning in debt. Then the HOA slaps a lien on the property, and suddenly Karen's real estate contacts swoop in and buy it for pennies on the dollar. Michael felt his hands clench into fists. "And no one's ever stopped her?" Mrs. Henderson shook her head. "Most people just give up and leave. Some try to fight, but by the time they realize what's happening, it's too late. I wanted to warn you, before that happens to you." Michael sat there stunned. It all made sense now. The excessive fines, the impossible rules, the not-so-subtle threats. Karen wasn't just a power-hungry HOA president. She was running a scam, and now he was her next target. From that moment on, Michael started noticing things, little details he had overlooked before. The way Karen would always linger near his property, eyeing it like she already owned it. The whispered conversations among certain board members when he walked by. The fact that the same handful of people always voted in favor of the most absurd HOA policies. Then came the warnings. Mysterious, untraceable messages slipped under his door. "It's not worth the fight. Just leave. She always wins. You don't know what you're up against." Michael refused to be intimidated. But as the days passed, the harassment escalated. One morning, he woke up to find his trash cans knocked over, garbage strewn across his lawn. That same day, he received a $500 fine for excessive debris. A week later, his car tires were mysteriously slashed overnight. When he reported it, the HOA dismissed it as an unfortunate incident. Then, the most chilling event yet, his water was shut off. He called the utility company only to be told the order to disconnect service had come from the HOA. Michael knew then that this wasn't just about pushing him out. Karen was trying to break him. Just when he thought it couldn't get worse, it did. A certified letter arrived, marked urgent. Final notice. Heart-pounding, Michael tore it open and began to read. "Dear Mr. Carter, due to repeated violations and failure to comply with HOA regulations, the Homeowners Association has determined that your property is in breach of community standards. As per Section 5.3 of the HOA agreement, the board has voted to proceed with the foreclosure process. You have 30 days to vacate the premises. Failure to do so will result in legal action and removal." Michael's breath caught in his throat. Foreclosure? His mind raced. He had paid his mortgage. He had fought the ridiculous fines. How could they do this? But then, he remembered what Mrs. Henderson had said. This was the plan all along. Karen wasn't just trying to kick him out. She was trying to steal his home. But what she didn't know was that Michael wasn't like the others. He wasn't going down without a fight. Michael sat at his kitchen table, the final notice still clutched in his hands, his mind racing. The HOA was trying to steal his home. His home. Everything he had worked for, the life he had built, was now hanging by a thread because of one power-hungry woman and her corrupt system. But unlike the others before him, Michael wasn't going to roll over and let Karen win. He needed help. That evening, after hours of searching online, he found a law firm that specialized in HOA disputes and property law. The next morning, he walked into the office of Ethan Reynolds, a seasoned attorney known for exposing HOA corruption. Ethan was a sharp, no-nonsense man in his early 50s, with graying hair and an air of quiet confidence. As Michael explained, everything, the fines, the threats, the mysterious foreclosure notice, Ethan listened carefully, taking notes. When Michael finally finished, the lawyer leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen against his desk. "Michael, you're not the first person to come to me about this HOA, but I have a feeling you might be the first to actually fight back." Michael frowned. "You mean Karen's done this before?" Ethan nodded. "More times than I can count. I've seen her and her board push homeowners into foreclosure over fabricated violations, then sell the properties to real estate investors they're secretly working with. It's a scam, an illegal one, but one that works because most people can't afford a legal battle. They either leave or go bankrupt trying to fight it." Michael clenched his fists. "So how do we stop her?" Ethan gave a knowing smirk. "We hit her where it hurts. Legally." Over the next few days, Ethan and his team began digging. What they uncovered was worse than Michael had imagined. Financial records showed thousands of dollars in mystery fees, collected from homeowners, disappearing without a trace. Karen had ties to real estate investors who had purchased multiple foreclosed homes in the neighborhood for far below market value. Former HOA board members had resigned suddenly, refusing to speak about why. Several homeowners had left under suspicious circumstances, pressured into selling their homes for pennies on the dollar. But the most damning piece of evidence? A leaked email from Karen herself instructing the board to make an example out of Michael. Michael's blood boiled as he read the email. She wanted him gone. She wanted his home. And she wasn't even hiding it. When Karen got wind that Michael had hired a lawyer, she wasted no time retaliating. First came the threats. A handwritten note was taped to his front door. Drop the lawsuit or you'll regret it. Then came the harassment. HOA board members pounded on his door at all hours, demanding he remove unauthorized fixtures that had never been a problem before. A report was filed against him for excessive noise, even though his house had been silent all night. An official HOA email was sent to all residents, falsely claiming Michael was a problematic homeowner who was attacking the community. Finally, things took a dangerous turn. Late one night, Michael was woken by the sound of shattering glass. Heart pounding, he rushed downstairs to find a brick had been thrown through his front window. Attached was a note. Last warning. Michael's hands shook as he read it. This wasn't just about property anymore. This was personal. Michael turned over every piece of evidence to Ethan, who immediately filed for an emergency court hearing. They had enough proof to not only stop the foreclosure, but to expose Karen's entire operation. The days leading up to the hearing were tense. Karen was panicking. She sent an HOA-wide email claiming Michael was harassing the board. She tried to bribe Ethan, offering to drop all fines if he convinced Michael to back off. She even showed up at Michael's house, her perfect composure cracking. "This is a mistake, Michael," she said, her voice tight with barely contained rage. "You don't understand how things work here." Michael stared her down. "No, Karen, you don't understand. You can't bully me like you did the others." Her expression darkened, but for the first time, Michael saw something else in her eyes. Fear. She knew she was losing. The night before the court hearing, Michael stood in his living room, staring at the broken window. He had come to this neighborhood looking for peace, for a home. Instead, he had found a war. But he wasn't afraid anymore. Tomorrow, he would face Karen in court. Tomorrow, the truth would come out. And tomorrow, for the first time in years, Karen Prescott would finally answer for her crimes. The night before the court hearing, Michael sat in his dimly lit living room, exhaustion weighing heavy on his shoulders. He had fought hard, gathered evidence, and built a solid case against Karen and her corrupt HOA. But deep down, a lingering doubt gnawed at him. Was it enough? Karen had been running her scheme for years, manipulating homeowners, stacking the board with her loyalists and making sure no one could fight back. What if she had one more trick up her sleeve? As Michael rubbed his tired eyes, his phone buzzed. An unknown number. He hesitated before answering. "Hello?" a nervous voice whispered on the other end. "Is this Michael Carter?" Michael straightened. "Who's asking?" A pause. Then, "I need to meet with you. It's about Karen. I have proof." Michael's pulse quickened. "Who are you?" I can't say over the phone. Just meet me at the old diner on Birch Street. Midnight. Come alone." The line went dead. Michael arrived at the diner a few minutes before midnight. The place was nearly empty, save for a waitress wiping down tables and a lone figure sitting in the back booth, hood pulled over their head. Taking a deep breath, Michael walked over and slid into the seat across from them. The hooded figure slowly looked up. It was Daniel Wells. Michael's eyes widened. Daniel was the HOA's secretary. He had always seemed quiet, keeping his head down during meetings while Karen dominated the conversation. "I know you have every reason not to trust me," Daniel said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I couldn't stay silent anymore." Michael folded his arms. "Why now? You've been working with Karen for years." Daniel sighed. "Because I was scared. Karen isn't just running an HOA, she's running a racket. I've seen what happens to people who try to stop her. I kept my mouth shut because I didn't want to be next." Michael leaned forward. "What changed?" Daniel swallowed hard before sliding a thick manila folder across the table. "This." Michael opened it and scanned the contents. Bank statements, internal emails, and signed agreements, damning evidence that Karen had been embezzling HOA funds for years. Michael's jaw tightened as he flipped through page after page of fraudulent transactions. "She's stealing from the homeowners." Daniel nodded. "And that's not all." He pulled out a flash drive. "This has recordings of board meetings Karen thought were off the record. It proves she was intentionally targeting you and others, so she could force them out and flip their homes for profit." Michael's hands clenched into fists. This was it, the final piece of the puzzle. As Michael gathered the documents, Daniel's face turned pale. "Karen can't find out I gave this to you. If she does, I don't know what she'll do." Michael nodded. "I'll protect you, but you have to testify." Daniel hesitated, fear flashing in his eyes, but after a long moment, he exhaled sharply. "Okay, I'll do it." Just as they stood to leave, a black SUV rolled past the diner's window, slowing slightly. Michael's stomach dropped. "Karen." Daniel's face drained of color. "She knows." The SUV sped away, but the message was clear. Karen wasn't going to go down without a fight. But now, Michael had the weapon to take her down for good. The air inside the county courthouse was thick with tension. Michael sat at the plaintiff's table, his hands resting on the thick manila folder that contained everything: the financial records, the leaked emails, the hidden audio recordings. This was it, the moment where everything Karen had built on deception would come crashing down. Across the room, Karen Prescott sat at the defense table, her posture rigid, her expression unreadable. She wore the same air of superiority she always did, but Michael could see something in her eyes, a flicker of uncertainty. The judge, a stern-looking man with sharp eyes, adjusted his glasses and glanced between both parties. "Let's begin. Mr. Carter, you may present your case." Michael stood, his heart pounding but his voice steady. "Your Honor, I am here today because my homeowners association, led by Ms. Prescott, has engaged in fraudulent, manipulative, and illegal practices. This is not just a case of excessive fines or minor rule violations. This is about a coordinated effort to steal homes from honest people for financial gain." Karen scoffed loudly, rolling her eyes. "Oh, please, Your Honor, this is nothing but baseless accusations from a disgruntled homeowner who couldn't follow simple HOA rules." The judge shot her a warning look. "You'll have your turn to speak, Ms. Prescott. Continue, Mr. Carter." Michael took a breath and held up the stack of evidence. "I have financial records showing thousands of dollars in fraudulent fines collected from homeowners that mysteriously disappeared from the HOA account. I have emails from Ms. Prescott herself instructing the board to make an example out of me. And I have recordings where she openly admits to pushing homeowners out to flip their properties for profit." The judge leaned forward slightly, his interest piqued. "Is this true, Mr. Carter? You have recordings?" Michael nodded. "Yes, Your Honor, and I'd like to play them now." A hush fell over the courtroom as the first audio clip played. Karen's voice echoed through the room, cold and calculating. "Michael, Carter is the perfect target. He's new, he doesn't know the system, and once we stack enough fines, he'll either leave or default. Then we take the house, same as we've done before." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Even the HOA board members sitting behind Karen shifted uncomfortably. Karen's face turned pale, but she quickly masked it with a forced laugh. "This is ridiculous." That could be anyone's voice. Michael's lawyer, Ethan Reynolds, stood up. "Your Honor, we also have email correspondence that confirms this conversation took place, and I'd like to call a witness, someone from the HOA itself who can verify everything." The doors to the courtroom opened, and Daniel Wells stepped inside. Karen's composure finally cracked. Daniel took the stand, his hands shaking slightly as he swore to tell the truth. He cleared his throat, then glanced at Michael before looking at the judge. "Your Honor, everything Mr. Carter is saying is true. I was the HOA secretary for 3 years, and during that time I witnessed Karen manipulate homeowners, fabricate fines, and secretly work with investors to buy foreclosed properties at below-market prices. I was too scared to speak up before, but I have copies of financial records, email logs, and internal meeting minutes that confirm it all." The room fell completely silent. The judge turned his gaze toward Karen. "Ms. Prescott, do you have a response?" Karen sat frozen, her mouth slightly open. For the first time, Her mask of arrogance had shattered. This is absurd," she finally sputtered. "They're lying. This is a conspiracy against me." But the judge wasn't buying it. He motioned toward the bailiff. "Confiscate all documents for review. And given the seriousness of these allegations, I am ordering an official audit of the HOA's financial records." Karen's face drained of color. An audit. She knew what that meant. Once they dug deeper, they'd uncover everything. As the hearing progressed, it became clear that Karen's empire was built on lies and fraud. Other homeowners came forward with similar stories. More evidence surfaced: secret bank accounts, fake contractor invoices, fabricated violations. Karen sat in stunned silence as her world unraveled before her. The judge finally spoke. "Ms. Prescott, based on the evidence presented today, I am ruling in favor of Mr. Carter. The foreclosure on his home is nullified, and all fraudulent fines imposed by the HOA are to be refunded immediately. Furthermore, a formal investigation into your financial dealings will begin immediately." Karen tried one last desperate plea. "Your Honor, please. This is all a misunderstanding." "Enough, Ms. Prescott." The judge's voice was firm. "You have abused your position, manipulated homeowners, and engaged in illegal activity. This court will not tolerate it. We will see the full extent of the law applied to your actions." Michael exhaled, his hands gripping the edge of the table. It was over. Karen Prescott had finally lost. The courtroom was silent as the judge delivered his final ruling. Based on the overwhelming evidence of fraud, corruption, and unethical conduct, this court finds in favor of Mr. Carter. The foreclosure is nullified, and all fines issued under Ms. Prescott's authority are deemed fraudulent and must be refunded immediately. Furthermore, this case will be referred to the state attorney for a full criminal investigation. A murmur of shock rippled through the gallery. Homeowners who had once lived in fear of Karen's unchecked power exchanged glances of relief and vindication. Michael sat frozen for a moment, letting the words sink in. He had won. Across the room, Karen Prescott sat in stunned silence, her once confident smirk completely gone. The color drained from her face as reality hit her. She wasn't untouchable anymore. She shot up from her chair. "Your Honor, this is outrageous. These accusations are lies. I was only enforcing the rules." The judge didn't even look at her. "Ms. Prescott, sit down." Karen turned to the HOA board members who once stood loyally by her side, but they were already distancing themselves. They refused to meet her gaze, their expressions a mix of guilt and fear. She was alone. For the first time, Karen Prescott had lost control. The fallout was swift and brutal. Within days, state investigators descended upon the HOA office. Financial records were seized, accounts were frozen, and forensic accountants began digging into every shady transaction. What they uncovered was worse than anyone imagined. Hundreds of thousands of dollars in stolen HOA funds, forged documents used to push homeowners into foreclosure. Secret account where Karen funneled stolen money from illegal fines. It wasn't just unethical, it was criminal. Soon, Karen and several members of the HOA board were arrested on charges of fraud, embezzlement, and racketeering. The woman who once ruled the neighborhood with an iron fist was now being led out of her own office in handcuffs. With Karen gone, the HOA board was completely dismantled. A court-appointed investigator took over, and a class-action lawsuit was filed by homeowners who had been wronged. Michael watched as families who had been forced out of their homes were finally getting justice. The court ordered full financial restitution to every homeowner Karen had stolen from. The money she had hoarded in her secret accounts, seized. Her assets, liquidated. Every cent went back to the people she had wronged, and for the first time in years, the community was free. As the news spread, Karen's once powerful reputation was left in ruins. The local media plastered her face all over the news, branding her the HOA Queen of Corruption. Former homeowners she had victimized came forward, exposing years of manipulation and deceit. Her name became synonymous with greed and power abuse. No real estate firm would touch her. No HOA would hire her. She was blacklisted. Karen Prescott, the woman who once controlled an entire neighborhood with fear, was now a disgraced criminal. And as Michael walked down his street one evening, for the first time since moving in, He felt truly at home. The nightmare was over, and justice had been served. The days of fear and corruption were finally over. With Karen and her associates gone, the once toxic HOA was left in shambles. But instead of falling into chaos, something unexpected happened. The community came together. For years, homeowners had lived in silence, too afraid to stand up against Karen's rule. But now, they had a voice. The remaining board members who had been complicit in her schemes resigned in disgrace, and a special election was held to rebuild the HOA from the ground up. This time, the power didn't fall into the hands of one ruthless leader. Instead, the community chose honest, fair, and level-headed residents who truly cared about the neighborhood. Rules were revised, transparency was prioritized, and for the first time in years, the HOA wasn't a weapon, it was a service. And Michael? He was finally home. For the first time since he had moved in, Michael could wake up without dreading what ridiculous fine or threat might be waiting in his mailbox. The harassment, the intimidation, the fear, it was all gone. His home was his again. Neighbors who had once kept their heads down now greeted each other with genuine warmth. The tension that had once choked the streets like a thick fog was lifted, and one evening Michael stood on his porch watching the sun dip behind the rooftops and realized something profound. This was what he had fought for, not just for himself, but for everyone. A few weeks later, the neighborhood held a block party, something that had been unheard of under Karen's reign. The air smelled of barbecue, kids rode their bikes freely, and music played from someone's speaker. People laughed, talked, and finally felt safe again. Michael walked through the crowd, exchanging smiles and nods with neighbors who, for the first time, saw him not as the man Karen tried to destroy, but as the man who fought back and won. Mrs. Henderson, his elderly neighbor who had first warned him about Karen, approached with a plate of cookies and a knowing smile. "You did it, Michael. You gave this neighborhood its life back." Michael chuckled, shaking his head. "We all did." She patted his arm. "Maybe. But you were the first one brave enough to fight." As the night settled in and the celebration continued, Michael took a deep breath, letting the satisfaction of victory settle in. It hadn't been easy. He had been targeted, threatened, and nearly had his home stolen. But in the end, the truth won. Justice won. And as he looked around at his now happy neighborhood, he knew one thing for certain. Bullies like Karen only win when people are too afraid to stand up, but when good people fight back, justice always prevails. If you enjoyed this video and want to see the next part, let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to stay updated. See you in the next one. Your support means the world.